Hello and welcome to the Infoverse today. I'm the Infomancer speaking, and you are in my infinite realm. Previously in our videos, we have talked about hill dwarves, mountain dwarves, and deep dwarves. And if you're curious about learning about any of these types of dwarves, feel free to check out those other videos. They're really good, interesting. There's not much to the video because they're shot in the dark. This time I had some daylight hours to shoot, so I managed to squeeze in this video with some light, so it should hopefully be a little better quality. More than a little, but the things in the other videos are still interesting and worth listening to, even though there's nothing to watch, which even with the light, there's not much to watch. It's just me sitting here talking. So it's not overly interesting anyways. This is more something that you'll listen to while you go watch something else or do chores or whatever, is how I'd imagine people would really bother listening to this. But maybe there's some people watching it, if so, good on you, I appreciate that. But anyways, I'm rambling for no reason. This video is we finished the dwarves, so this video is not going to be about dwarves, but it is a Races of Thooril video. As I stated in a previous video, I thought there was 70 races, and there was at that point. However, I have since added an additional like 13 races or something, because I just didn't, even though 70 was a lot, I found some other interesting ideas I wanted to incorporate into my world. So there is a few more races now than there was before. However, I don't think that's going to make a big impact on anything, just the amount of videos I have. But again, I'm getting off topic. This video is about orcs, and specifically I'm talking about plain orcs. And when I say plain orcs, I don't mean plain as in ordinary, not special, whatever. What I mean plains as in big, open, grassy areas. And they are plain orcs because I have two kinds of orcs in my world. The first kind of orc is the plain orc, and the second kind is a cave orc, which I will go into in another video. They are quite often going to be in conflict with dwarves because, being cave orcs, they also are a subterranean race. But that's not this video, that's another one. This video is the plain orcs, which they're not just limited to plains. They're called plain orcs, but you can find them on the plains, of course, but also in deserts. You can find them in forests. Pretty much they're the on-ground, above-ground orcs, whereas the cave orcs are the subterranean ones. And that's a big difference between them. There's other differences, of course, which you'll find out as you watch the two videos. But the plain orcs are actually, I put quite a bit into them. And so this is going to be a two-part video. In this first part, I'm going to talk to you about my random ramblings so far, and about who the cave orcs are, and I'm going to tell you what weapons they're using and why I selected these weapons for them. In the second part of the video, I'm going to go into how they fight and what kind of armor they use alongside with their weapons. And it's really interesting. I think you're going to enjoy both videos, but I just feel that as long as my videos tend to be, if I was to go into all that detail with the plain orcs, well, we'd be looking at like an hour-long video, so I wanted to limit it at least somewhat. So first up, who are the plain orcs? Well, the plain orcs are a patriarchal society that live above ground. They are found all over the world, all continents, and all sorts of locations. They are usually a nomadic society, which means they live in tents and stuff, and they don't stay in one place, but instead would travel day to day. And they are a very warlike society. This is an entire society that makes their culture off of raiding and pillaging. And even if you were an orc that did not partake in the raiding and pillaging, you would still be associated with that, and you'd still kind of partook in it because you were with your fellow society members as they raided and pillaged and raped and all the stuff that the orcs do. So you are guilty by association at the very least, even if you don't partake in these activities, which most orcs would, male or female. They're all very warlike, they all like to fight, to kill, and that's just who they are. That being said, they're very feared, and they are very good killers because they are brutish. And parts of what makes them brutish is they have a lower intelligence than humans. They're not as dumb as, say, animals. And not that I think animals are dumb, actually. There are some really smart animals. But when I say that, I mean they have the same kind of thought process as a human does. It's just that they're not as good at thinking, and they don't come up with as smart of ideas. Their intelligence is lower. And this comes into play very much with how they fight and the weapons they use, which I'll get into in a minute or two. So they're kind of dumb. They're also bigger than humans, anywhere between about 6 inches and a foot bigger, depending on the orc and the location, the continent and stuff that they're on, but 6 to 12 inches bigger. They are quite strong. They are about as strong as in between a hill and a mountain dwarf. So if you remember from my previous videos, hill dwarves are 2 times as strong as a human, and a mountain dwarf is 2.5 times as strong as a human. So if a plain orc is supposed to be in between those two, it would be about 2.25 times as strong as a human. So much stronger than us, and only a bit taller, so a lot more muscle mass, a lot denser muscles, and their bones to support all that thick muscle and all that weight that's associated with it, because they do have to be much heavier than us with all that muscle. An average orc is going to, like a dwarf, weigh about 200 to 250 pounds. So quite a bit heavier than what you would picture your normal fit human, because a normal fit human, at least by my understanding of American standards, would be somewhere in the 150 to 180 range, depending on your body size. I may be wrong on that. Everybody has their own opinions on what fit is, and what weight is, but 250 to, put it a little higher actually. 250 to 300 pounds is what we're going to say a plain orc is. So definitely a little higher. What you would picture a very obese human to look like. They would have that weight, but rather than look obese and be obese, they would be big, bulky monsters. And very terrifying because of their great strength. They are also faster than humans. Perhaps not a whole lot faster, but they are faster than us because they're bigger than us. Their stride is bigger, and if they move at the same speed as a human and their stride is bigger, they're going to be faster in appearance just because their steps are that much bigger. But if they are also slightly faster than us, which they are because their big, dense, tight muscles allow them to move really quick and react quickly, and do things with a lot of power, including walking and moving, they're much quicker than us. And they have bigger strides, and they move their legs faster than we do. So they're stronger, they're faster. Their senses are equal to ours. They may even have a better sense of smell. It's not greatly better, but it is a stronger sense of smell, and the other senses are akin to ours, ours being humans. And that really gives you an idea of who they are physically. Also, what they look like is they're going to range in color from deep dark greens to a lighter forest kind of green color, and they're going to have large teeth, almost like tusks coming out of their lower lips. No tusks or teeth coming out of their upper lips, but they do have a full jaw, or a full mouth of sharp fangs, and it's just that 2 of those teeth happen to be particularly large and protrude a little from their lower jaw. And they're usually bald, not always. When they do have hair, it tends to be browns and greens in color, but usually they don't grow hair. It's only on occasion you'll see an orc with hair. Not that they shave or anything like that, but just usually they don't grow it. Occasionally they do, but that is of course the exception. And there's really not a whole lot more to look at besides that. That tells you who they are. You know that they are a nomadic society, so you know the way they function, kind of. You know they're a patriarchy, so you know the males are in charge. and are generally going to be larger and more respected, but you do know the females also partake in the battles and fighting and killing and whatever. You know what they look like, and so that tells you who they are. So now I'm going to tell you the sorts of weapons they use. And the sorts of weapons they use are a little different than the way I set weapons up with my dwarves. With my dwarves, I pretty much stuck to what would be really, really good for their fighting style. And with the orcs, I did something a little different. And there is, to some extent, I did try to keep realism to it. And you'll see why it's there and how it worked, but why it's also different. First off, their ranged weapons are going to be Warren longbows. They're bigger than us, they're stronger than us, they're much better suited to archery. They could shoot way, way farther, pull a bow way, way easier. An English longbow to them is going to be like their normal longbow, and a warbow is going to be even bigger and way more powerful than that, and they're going to be quite dangerous and deadly with these things. They don't have any better senses, so they can't see you super far great out, but if you don't need to see your target if you're shooting into an army or into a village or whatever as you're raiding. You just need to see the general location they're in and loose your arrows there and trust that even if most of them miss, some of them are going to hit. You don't need to pick out specific targets until they're closer and you need to snipe. But I'll get into that in the next video on how they fight, just because of their great strength and their size. I think they're very well suited to war and longbows, and that's going to be what they use for their ranged weapons. Now after that, we've got a few different weapons that they use. Starting out with their long weapons, the only long weapons that you're going to see as far as similar to a polearm would be two-handed maces and morning stars. And the reasons you don't see halberds and berdiches and stuff is that those are really good weapons, specifically designed for making plate and take a lot of thought and process to come up with. Like I've stated and established, the plain orcs are kind of stupid. So a big bashing weapon is much more suited to their mentality. They're going to like that for getting past the armor. And that's what I feel they're going to use for their two-handed weapons. Following that same line of thought, when it comes to one-handed weapons, I feel that you're quite often going to see a club. It takes much less skill than a mace or a morning star, and the reason you would see a club more often than a mace or morning star, whereas in the two-handed weapons you do see two-handed maces and morning stars, is that if they're going to put all the time and energy and focus into making a metal weapon when it's so difficult for them and they're so stupid, they want it to be as big and effective as possible. So they stick with two-handed. If they're just going for a one-handed weapon, it doesn't have to be as big. So a club, sometimes spiked, sometimes not. It would depend on their preference, and you can see that with the cases of maces and morning stars, because a morning star is just a mace that has spikes. A lot of people think that you have spiked maces when they're one-handed or whatever, and the morning star is a two-handed thing. That's not the case. A mace is flanged, or a round ball, or a fist with a spike or whatever, a single spike. But a morning star is actually the ball with the spikes all over it. That's a morning star. Some people still call them maces. As far as I'm concerned, and many people agree with me, that's the distinction. And so sometimes you have spike clubs, sometimes not. Doesn't change what the weapon is. That's just what they use. But that's not going to be their only single-handed weapons. They are in fact going to have swords and axes. And they're not going to be the same swords and axes we know, though. And the reason for this is their stupidity. And let me explain what these are. When I say swords and axes, I'm talking about single-handed arming swords, of course, because an arming sword is a single-handed weapon. In my world, there are two-handed arming swords, which are an arming sword with a two-handed handle, which are a special weapon specifically designed for halflings. But that's a completely different video and has nothing to do with this. So, an arming sword and a single-handed axe, and that needs to have a distinction because it's not a big, long Dane axe or a walking axe, but just a small axe that you would hold in your hand. And these are not ordinary swords and axes because they are serrated. And this is where it seems like I lose some of my realism. Because in real life, you would not find a serrated weapon on the battlefield. For one, the serrations would probably break on heavy impact against armor and other weapons. And I can't really come up with a solution to this except to say it's a magic metal, it's a magic world, you just have to get past it. So I do lose some realism there, and I do regret that. However, I feel that it works really well for them because, before I get into that, another reason you would not find a serrated weapon on a battlefield is that it just doesn't cut as good. If you were to take a serrated blade and a smooth blade, and you were to slice a cardboard box, the serrated blade would make a much nastier looking cut, but the smooth blade would cut much deeper. Now this is important because this is why they use serrated weapons, and where some of the realism comes in. I said they're stupid. So if a serrated bladed cut looks much worse than a smooth bladed cut, even if it's not really, if you're really stupid, you wouldn't realize the smooth blade cut better. You would think that the worst looking cut was worse, actually, and you would like the serrated weapon more. You would like that serrated cut, because the serration gets caught on bone or tendons or whatever it gets caught on, clothing, and then if you continue to slice or to push, to draw in or to push out, you will then tear things because the serrations are caught and sharp. And that's actually how they fight with these weapons. Since they are serrated, I can't make up for the fact that they should break on impact and I don't let them, but instead they whack them down into you and then they slice or they push. And so these weapons are referred to sometimes as Orcish war saws, because that slicing motion and that pushing motion, well, with the serrated blades, it allows it to slice, to saw through armor, bone, whatever. And that's how they use them. And so there is some realism to it, even though there is some lack of realism, and you would never find a serrated weapon on a real battlefield. This is why they use these serrated weapons, as they noticed, hey, this has a really nice, nasty looking cut. I think that's better than a smooth blade. And so that's what they do, and how they act. And that, along with their nice crushing weapons, sometimes with spikes to make it stab too, I think that really suits their low intelligence and their brutish power and force. And I think these weapons work really, really well for the plain orcs. I mean, imagine if you saw a big serrated axe and you knew that thing was going to be used to cut you repeatedly, to tear away at you as they saw through you, you'd be terrified. If you knew that they quite often are strong enough to stab through the armor with the serrations and then tear it with a single slicing motion, you would be scared because you know that your armor can't do anything to stop that. And that's the way these serrated blades work and the way they are set up. Yes, there is a lack of realism, but at least the way they are used and the way they are presented and why they are used is in a realistic manner. And so it makes up somewhat for the lack of realism, and it is fantasy, so it's okay to have some fantastical elements sometimes. Anyways, these are the weapons that I've chosen for my plain orcs. As you can see, it's quite different from the weapons that Shadiversity chose. He looked at much more realistic weapons and why they would be used, whereas I think that with an orc they wouldn't necessarily follow the same logic as a human since they're stupid. He said that wouldn't affect battle as much. I feel a little differently about it, and that's why I've selected the weapons that I have as compared to some of the weapons that he chose. However, we did both agree on the bow being the best weapon for them. It doesn't take a ton of intelligence to make or come up with the bow, and it's really well suited to who they are. So that is who my cave orcs are and the weapons they use. Please come back next time and we will go over the armor they use and how they use these weapons in battle with their armor, the way they fight. It'll be a really interesting video and I look forward to seeing you there. See you next time, here at the end of verse.